Morgan Son's Meat Shop, located at the corner of Pine Street and 4th Avenue in Seattle, had been a city landmark for 3 generations. On an early October morning, Baxter Morgan began his day at 4 a.m., as usual. He was always the first to arrive at the shop to check deliveries and prepare for the workday. In the dim light of the back room, the 35-year-old man methodically checked the quality of the meat that had arrived from suppliers the night before. "Family traditions never die," Baxter often repeated as he cut up carcasses with surgical precision. His grandfather had opened the shop in 1952, his father had continued the business, and now he, the sole heir, was responsible for preserving the family legacy. Tall, with strong hands and a calm, confident gaze, Baxter embodied the old school of craftsmen who take pride in their work. In recent years, the business had flourished, thanks to growing interest among foodies in high-quality meat from local producers. Baxter had established relationships with farmers in Washington state who raised hormone and antibiotic-free, grass-fed cattle. If you're going to eat meat, it should be of the highest quality and come from animals that have lived a decent life. This was his business principle, which helped soften criticism from activists. At 6:30 a.m., when the first rays of sunlight lit up the street, the shop doors opened for early shoppers. Baxter's assistants, Ray and Thomas, had arrived half an hour earlier and had already arranged the fresh cuts behind the glass display case. Regular customers appreciated Baxter's knowledge, his recommendations on how to cook different cuts, and his respect for his craft. 10 miles from the butcher shop, in a spacious studio with large windows in the Fremont neighborhood, a meeting of activists from the organization Life Without Suffering was taking place. The group's founder, Clara Morgan, stood in front of 24 people, discussing the strategy for the upcoming campaign against industrial animal farming. "Today we have an opportunity to draw public attention to the suffering of millions of animals," Clara said, gesturing energetically. "Our demonstration in front of PacWest Meat's headquarters should be peaceful but memorable. We're not just protesting, we're offering an alternative." At 32, Clara Morgan has become a familiar face in Seattle's vegan movement. Her delicate features, long hair tied back in a practical ponytail, and piercing gaze have been a regular feature in the local news. A former biology professor at the University of Washington, she left her academic career for activism after visiting an industrial farm 3 years ago. "Remember," she continued, "our strength lies in information and compassion, not aggression. Hand out flyers, show the facts, offer plant-based alternatives. We change the world by changing people's minds." After the meeting, Clara checked the time. She had to meet her husband for lunch in an hour. The irony of her life was that she, a leader of the vegan movement, was married to one of the city's most famous butchers. Their relationship was a source of constant speculation in the local community. At Greenleaf, a compromise restaurant that served both meat dishes and high-quality vegan options, Baxter was already waiting at their usual table. When he saw his wife, he smiled and stood up to greet her. Despite their fundamental differences in outlook, they gave the impression of a harmonious couple. "How was the meeting?" Baxter asked as they sat down at the table. "Productive. We're preparing for a demonstration in front of PacWest," Clara replied, looking over the menu. "Don't worry, your shop isn't part of our plans." "I'm not worried," Baxter shrugged. "My suppliers are family farms with ethical treatment of animals, not corporations." It was their usual exchange, almost a ritual. Outwardly, they showed respect for each other's choices, although both knew that their values were fundamentally incompatible. "Jason sent the preliminary calculations for the restaurant today." Baxter changed the subject. "It looks promising." Clara froze for a moment, then nodded with a strained smile. "Do you really want to go in that direction?" Jason Foster, a chef with experience in Michelin-starred restaurants, had returned to his native Seattle 6 months ago and offered Baxter a partnership. The idea was to create a fine dining restaurant with an emphasis on high-quality meat from local producers, an extension of Morgan's butcher shop concept. "It's a logical business development, Clara. and a great opportunity to demonstrate a responsible approach to meat use, Baxter said calmly, but there was firmness in his voice. You can talk about humane slaughter all you want, but it's still slaughter, Clara replied quietly, then sighed deeply. I'm sorry. We agreed not to discuss this during dinner. Baxter nodded, and they moved on to more neutral topics, but the tension did not completely disappear. Later that day, Baxter met with Jason Foster at a small bar near the butcher shop. Jason, an energetic 38-year-old chef with short hair and numerous tattoos on his arms, was the complete opposite of the methodical and reserved Baxter. I found the perfect place on Market Street, Jason announced, showing photos on his tablet. It's a little more expensive than we planned, but the location is worth it. It looks good, agreed Baxter, looking through the pictures. But we need to carefully calculate all the risks. It's a significant investment. The market is ripe for this concept. Meat with a story, a focus on local products, a limited menu that changes depending on the ingredients available, Jason said quickly and enthusiastically. Of course, we'll face criticism from the vegan community, but that could even work in our favor. Create hype. Baxter frowned. I'd prefer to avoid confrontation. I have personal reasons. Your wife, Jason nodded. I still don't understand how you two get along under the same roof. It's like a gun manufacturer married to a pacifist. We've found a way to coexist, Baxter replied dryly. At that moment, his phone vibrated. A message from Clara. There's been a problem with the demonstration. I'll be late. Don't wait up for dinner. Baxter sighed quietly. Perhaps they managed to maintain the appearance of harmony, but lately it had become increasingly difficult. That same evening, at the Seattle police station, officers were dispersing a group of detained vegan activists. The demonstration in front of the Pac West office had gotten out of hand when several protesters tried to break into the building. Clara, although not among those arrested, stayed behind to provide legal support to her comrades. This is a peaceful protest. We have the right to express our opinion, one of the activists shouted as she was led out of the interrogation room. In the corner of the waiting room, Clara was talking quietly with a lawyer. Her face was tense, her eyes a mixture of disappointment and determination. When she finally returned home after midnight, Baxter was still awake. He was sitting in the living room with a glass of whiskey, reviewing a business plan for a restaurant. Everything okay? He asked, without looking up from his papers. 4 people were arrested. 2 will be charged with disturbing the peace, Clara said, sinking into the chair opposite her husband. That wasn't our plan. A few radical activists joined in at the last minute. Baxter finally looked at his wife. This will reflect badly on your organization. Thanks for your concern, she said sarcastically. How did the meeting with Jason go? Did you decide how you're going to serve the animal carcasses, with or without a side of public approval? The tension they usually worked hard to hide in public came out in moments like this when they were alone. Beneath the mask of mutual respect lay a deep ideological conflict. I'm not going to discuss that now, Baxter said, closing the folder of documents. It's been a long day. For both of us, Clara agreed, heading for the bedroom. Left alone, Baxter finished his whiskey and thought about how much their lives had changed over the past 3 years. When they met, Clara was a biology teacher with an interest in ecology, but not a fanatical activist. Their differences seemed intriguing rather than insurmountable. Now, every day was an exercise in diplomacy, an attempt to maintain a fragile peace in a home divided by irreconcilable beliefs. In the quiet Morgan home in the Queen Anne neighborhood, early Saturday mornings began with the familiar ritual of silent avoidance. Baxter made himself breakfast of bacon and eggs, filling the kitchen with smells that Clara found repulsive. She busied herself making smoothies from organic fruits and vegetables at the other end of the spacious kitchen, studiously ignoring her husband's actions. This unspoken truce had become the norm in their life together, especially in recent months. 5 years of marriage had turned into a carefully choreographed dance of compromise and avoidance. 2 separate refrigerators, separate kitchen utensils, different restaurants for business meetings. There was an invisible boundary in the house that divided territories and habits. Clara silently scrolled through the notifications on her phone, frowning from time to time. After the incident at the Pac West meat protest, her organization had come under intense scrutiny from the local press, and not always in a positive light. "I have to meet with a reporter from the Seattle Chronicle today," Clara said, breaking the morning silence. "Emily Chen. She's writing an article about the conflict between vegans and the meat industry." Baxter looked up from his breakfast. "What exactly does she want to know?" "She requested interviews with both of us, as a unique couple representing both sides of the conflict." "I declined the joint interview." Baxter nodded. Public discussion of their marriage was something they both studiously avoided. "Good call. The last thing we need is to become a circus sideshow for the Sunday papers." Across town, at the Seattle Chronicle newsroom, Emily Chen was reviewing her notes for her upcoming interview with Clara Morgan. At 30, Emily had already earned a reputation as a journalist capable of getting to the heart of complex social conflicts. Her series of articles on the confrontation between environmental activists and logging companies had won her a local journalism award last year. "Vegans versus Butchers Crossing the Line" was to be the title of her new series. And the marriage of Clara and Baxter Morgan was the perfect human story to illustrate this conflict. But their refusal to do a joint interview complicated the task. In her office, Emily organized information about Clara Morgan. 3 years ago, Clara was an ordinary biology professor at the University of Washington with a moderate interest in environmental issues. Then, in the spring of 2022, there was a sharp turn. Clara resigned from the university and founded the organization Life Without Suffering. What prompted such a radical career change? According to the official version, which Clara voiced in rare interviews, it all started with her research trip to an industrial farm, where she saw the conditions in which animals were kept with her own eyes. But Emily suspected that there was a more personal story behind it. The Evergreen Cafe, where Clara agreed to meet with the journalist, was a well-known vegan establishment in the Capitol Hill neighborhood. Emily arrived early and chose a table in the corner that offered relative privacy. Clara arrived right on time, looking precise and collected, with her laptop and a stack of her organization's brochures. After exchanging formal greetings, Emily turned on her recorder and began the interview with questions about the recent protests and the incident at the Pac West office. "Our organization does not support violent methods," Clara stated firmly. "What happened at Pac West was the initiative of a few radicals who joined our demonstration." Emily carefully steered the conversation toward more personal topics. "In one of your early interviews, you mentioned a trip to an industrial farm as a turning point. But as a biologist, you must have known about animal husbandry practices before that?" Something flashed in Clara's eyes, a shadow of memory, of pain. But she quickly regained her composure. "There's a difference between academic knowledge and personal experience. What I saw there changed me on a fundamental level." Emily knew she was digging deeper than the official version, but her journalistic instincts told her that there was a real story here. "Was this trip related to your research at the university?" The pause before the answer was almost imperceptible. "No, it was a personal investigation, after I learned certain information about local meat suppliers." The reaction was minimal, but Emily noted that Clara avoided directly mentioning her husband's family business. Interesting. Meanwhile, at Morgan Son's butcher shop, Baxter was facing problems of a different kind. That morning, a small group of protesters appeared at the store entrance with signs condemning the killing of animals. They weren't blocking the entrance and were acting within the law, but their presence was scaring away some customers. "This is the 3rd time this month," said Ray, Baxter's assistant. "Some customers turn around when they see them." Baxter watched the situation through the window. He recognized several members of Clara's organization, although Clara herself was not among them. It was part of their unspoken agreement. Her activists would not target his business specifically, but would protest against the meat industry as a whole. But the boundaries of that agreement were becoming increasingly blurred. Sales had fallen by 15% in recent weeks. Baxter attributed this not only to the protests, but also to the growing popularity of plant-based meat alternatives promoted by activists like his wife. The planned restaurant with Jason Foster was becoming not just an opportunity for expansion, but a strategy for survival in a changing market landscape. That evening, Jason met with Baxter at the butcher shop after closing. He brought the final version of the business plan and financial projections. "Time is running out, Bucks," Jason said, tapping his fingers nervously on the table. "The space on Market Street won't be available forever. We have competitors ready to sign a lease at any moment." Baxter studied the numbers. The investment was significant, almost all of his savings and a line of credit secured by the butcher shop. "I understand the risks," Jason continued to press. "But high-end restaurants with an emphasis on ethical meat are a growing trend. We can be pioneers in this field in Seattle." "I need time," Baxter replied. "Decisions like this aren't made in a day." "You've had a month," Jason objected. "What's holding you back? The finances are in order, the concept is worked out. It can't be." He paused, then lowered his voice. "It's because of Clara, isn't it? You're afraid of her reaction." Baxter didn't answer, but his gaze hardened. Jason raised his hands in a conciliatory gesture. "I'm sorry. It's none of my business. But think about it, Bucks. It's your life. Your business." After Jason left, Baxter remained in the silence of the closed store. The decision to invest in the restaurant was only the tip of the iceberg of problems in his marriage to Clara. Deeper, unspoken conflicts lay beneath the surface of their relationship. The Morgan family had its secrets. Baxter's grandfather, who founded the butcher shop, started the business in the difficult post-war years and did not always follow the law. There were rumors of ties to organized crime and deliveries of meat of dubious origin. Baxter's father spent decades cleaning up the family business's reputation, and Baxter himself was raised with strict ethical principles: transparency in deliveries, honest business relationships, and product quality. But not everything could be fixed. Once, early in their relationship, Baxter told Clara about the dark pages of his family's history. At the time, she took it as something long past, irrelevant to the present. But with her transformation into a committed activist, these old stories took on new meaning. After her interview with Emily Chen, Clara did not return home immediately. She went to a small veterinary clinic in the suburbs of Seattle, where her old friend Sarah worked. It was at this clinic 3 years ago that an event occurred that changed Clara's life. At the time, Clara was still teaching at the university and preparing material for a course on ethics in biology. Sarah called her with an offer to attend an operation on a cow rescued from an industrial farm. The animal was suffering from a multitude of diseases caused by appalling living conditions. Clara agreed, seeing it as an educational experience. What she saw at the clinic shook her to her core, but the real catalyst for change was a discovery she made later. While reviewing the animal's provenance, Clara discovered a connection to one of the suppliers working with the Morgan's butcher shop, a supplier that Baxter had presented as a model of ethical animal husbandry. Clara never confronted her husband directly about this issue. Instead, she began her own investigation, visiting other farms that worked with the family business. The results were mixed. Some did adhere to high standards, but others hid unsavory practices behind a facade of humane animal husbandry. For Clara, this was not just a discovery of hypocrisy in the meat industry, but a personal betrayal. The man she loved was part of a system based on suffering, even if he himself was not aware of the whole truth. It was after this discovery that Clara decided to leave her academic career and devote herself to activism. But she couldn't bring herself to end her marriage to Baxter, partly because of the complicated feelings she still had for him, partly for strategic reasons. Her position as the wife of a well-known butcher gave her a unique perspective, and, oddly enough, greater credibility in the eyes of the public. Returning home after her visit to the clinic, Clara prepared for another evening of silent coexistence with the man she once loved unconditionally, but now saw as part of the problem she was fighting. October in Seattle was cold. The tension in the Morgan home grew with each passing day. The couple barely spoke, exchanging only the most necessary phrases. Returning home one evening, Baxter found a meeting of Clara's organization's board members in his living room, planning a vegan fair. His house, built with money from the family butcher shop, was being used to organize an event against his business. He silently gathered his things and left for the apartment above the store. The next day, Clara called, but not to apologize. "You have to come to the fair." Her voice sounded tense. "We're organizing a debate between supporters of plant-based and meat-based diets. I want you to represent your side." "You want to put me up as a target in front of a crowd of vegans?" Baxter laughed without a hint of amusement. "I want an honest dialogue," Clara replied. Against his better judgment, Baxter agreed. Perhaps part of him still hoped for reconciliation. The vegan fair was held in a spacious exhibition center. When Baxter entered, many recognized him. A whisper rippled through the hall. Clara's husband, Butcher Morgan. The debate began relatively calmly. Baxter spoke about responsible meat consumption and ethical animal husbandry practices. His opponent was a well-known vegan nutritionist. The scandal erupted when questions from the audience began. A young man with red hair, a member of the radical wing of the vegan movement, rose from his seat. "How can you talk about respect for the creatures you kill? You hypocritically call yourself an ethical butcher, while your suppliers hide the real conditions in which the animals are kept." Baxter began to respond, but was interrupted by shouts from the audience. Clara, sitting in the front row, did not intervene. The activist played a video on the big screen, filmed with a hidden camera, showing the horrific conditions on the farm that supplied Morgan's son's butcher shop. The hall erupted in cries of outrage. Baxter, shocked, stared at the screen. He had personally inspected this farm 6 months ago and had seen nothing like this. When he looked at Clara, her face was impenetrable. She knew. Perhaps she herself had organized this leak. Baxter left the event amid shouts and insults. In the days that followed, a media scandal erupted. Local news outlets picked up the story of the famous butcher's double standards. Protesters constantly stood guard in front of the shop, and sales plummeted. Baxter temporarily closed the store and began his own investigation into the farm incident. Meanwhile, Clara returned home and discovered that Baxter had taken more things from the house. In his office, the desk drawers were open and some folders were missing. Sifting through the remaining documents, she unexpectedly found an old envelope hidden under the false bottom of a drawer. Inside were 30-year-old photographs and police reports. The photos showed Baxter's father with members of a notorious Seattle crime syndicate from the 1990s. The reports mentioned suspicions of illegal slaughter of livestock, theft of animals, and sale of meat without permits. But the most shocking thing was a letter written by Baxter himself. In it, he confessed that in his youth, while working with his father, he had personally participated in the butchering of illegally acquired animals. "I was young and didn't understand the consequences, but the blood on my hands is not just a metaphor," he wrote. Shocked by the discovery, Clara anonymously forwarded some of this information to Emily Chen, hoping that the journalist would conduct a more in-depth investigation. Emily received an anonymous message late in the evening. Documents, photos, and brief information with no indication of the sender. She was usually skeptical of anonymous sources, but the materials looked authentic. The next day, Emily began her investigation. She studied the archives of the Seattle Chronicle, looked through old police reports, and contacted a former detective. By evening, she had a fairly complete picture. The Morgan family did indeed have ties to organized crime. Baxter's father worked with people who supplied stolen cattle. The butcher shop served as a front for money laundering. As a teenager, Baxter was inevitably involved in the family business. After his father's death, Baxter inherited the business and made serious efforts to clean up the shop's reputation. He severed ties with questionable suppliers and implemented a quality control system. But the shadow of the past still hung over him. However, the materials hinted that some illegal practices might have continued under Baxter. Circumstantial evidence pointed to possible health code violations and tax fraud. After gathering enough information, Emily contacted Baxter for comment. He agreed to meet at the closed butcher shop. Baxter looked exhausted. The last few days had brought him not only public scandal, but also business problems. Jason Foster, upon learning of the situation, issued an ultimatum: either immediate investment in the restaurant and measures to repair its reputation, or the deal would be canceled. After listening to Emily's questions about his family's past, Baxter did not deny the basic facts, but categorically rejected the allegations of ongoing violations. "I've spent 15 years clearing the Morgan name," he said. "If one farm violated our agreements, that's a failure in my control system. But that doesn't mean I'm knowingly involved in illegal practices." After the reporter left, Baxter sat alone for a long time. His business was on the verge of collapse. The reputation he had carefully built was undermined, and behind it all, he was sure, was his own wife. That evening, he made a decision. Baxter signed an agreement with Jason to invest in the restaurant, mortgaging his house and butcher shop to raise the funds. It was a desperate move, but the only way to save the business and start over. The restaurant was to be not just a new venture, but a platform for promoting the ideas of ethical meat consumption, a direct counterweight to vegan activism. Baxter returned home late in the evening to announce his decision. The house was plunged into semi-darkness, with only the kitchen light on. Clara was sitting at the table, sorting through documents about his family's past. "Did you know all along that the supplier was violating standards?" she asked. "No, I only found out at the fair," Baxter replied. "But you knew, and instead of telling me, you staged a public exposé." Clara didn't deny it. "Some things need to be said publicly." "What about this?" Baxter pointed to the papers. "Are you going to make this public too?" "I've already passed the information on to a journalist." Baxter nodded slowly. "I signed an agreement with Jason. We're opening a restaurant. I've invested our joint savings and mortgaged the house." Clara froze. This was the final blow to their marriage. Using their joint money to finance a business based on killing animals was a statement about values. "You've made your choice," she said quietly. "I've made mine." Baxter went to the bedroom to pack his things. Clara remained in the kitchen, staring ahead. Outwardly, she remained calm, but inside, she was making the most important decision of her life. That night, while Baxter slept in his apartment, Clara methodically researched information about various plant poisons. She studied their properties, methods of preparation, and symptoms of poisoning. Her movements were calm, her face remained serene, but her eyes reflected cold determination. A plan formed in her head. Prepare a special vegan dinner for reconciliation, add a plant extract that mimics the symptoms of a heart attack, and leave a symbolic message. She acted methodically, calculating doses and thinking through the details. At dawn, Clara sent Baxter a message, suggesting they meet in the evening at the butcher shop for a serious conversation about the future. He agreed, unaware that this conversation would be the last of his life. Ray Peterson, Baxter's assistant, arrived at Morgan Son's butcher shop earlier than usual. The last few weeks had been tough for business, and he wanted to get everything ready to resume operations after the temporary closure. Unlocking the front door at 6 in the morning, Ray immediately sensed something was wrong. There was a metallic smell in the air, reminiscent of slaughter days, but the shop had been closed for a week. Walking into the main hall, he turned on the light and froze in his tracks. Behind the glass display case, on the cold marble cutting table, lay the body of Baxter Morgan. His white work coat was soaked with blood, and on the wall behind him, bloody letters spelled out, "Meat is murder." Ray ran out into the street and dialed 911 with trembling hands. 30 minutes later, the crime scene was cordoned off by the police. Detective Michael Dawson, a veteran of the Seattle Police Department's Homicide Division, slowly walked around the room, studying every detail. At 45, Dawson had seen his share of violent deaths, but this one stood out for its theatrical staging. Tall, with perpetually tired eyes and premature gray hair, Dawson was known for his methodical approach and tenacity. His colleagues called him the Bulldog for his ability to latch onto a case and not let go until he got to the bottom of it. "Time of death?" he asked the medical examiner, who was crouched next to the body. "Preliminarily between midnight and 3 in the morning. I'll be more precise after the autopsy." Dawson nodded and moved closer to the body. At first glance, the cause of death appeared to be an extensive stab wound to the heart. Strangely, there wasn't as much blood as one might expect from such a wound. "The knife belongs to the victim," one of the officers reported, pointing to a professional butcher knife. "Judging by the engraving on the handle." Dawson examined the weapon, then looked at the inscription on the wall. "Who found the body?" "Ray Peterson, the butcher's assistant. He's in the patrol car now, giving his initial statement." "Has the victim's wife been notified?" "Officer Ramirez has gone to inform her. They live in Queen Anne." Dawson looked around again. The position of the body, the writing, the choice of weapon, everything pointed to a premeditated murder with strong emotional or ideological undertones. "Check the surveillance cameras in the area and gather information about the victim's recent conflicts." Within the next hour, the crime scene was filled with forensic investigators photographing every inch of the butcher shop and collecting evidence. Dawson studied the footage from the surveillance camera installed above the entrance. Unfortunately, there were no internal cameras in the shop, and the external camera only recorded Baxter entering the shop at around 8 p.m. and no one else entering or leaving until Ray arrived in the morning. Strange. If no one else had entered, did that mean the killer was already inside? Or had Baxter let him in himself through the back door, which was not visible to the camera? As Dawson was examining the back rooms, Clara Morgan arrived, accompanied by Officer Ramirez. Her face was white as chalk, her eyes red from crying. When she saw her husband's body, she let out a muffled cry and would have fallen if the officer hadn't caught her. "Mrs. Morgan, I'm so sorry," Dawson began, after Clara was seated in the butcher shop office and given a glass of water. "I need to ask you a few questions." Clara nodded, clutching a paper tissue in her hands. "I understand. When was the last time you saw your husband?" "Last night around 7. We had a serious conversation. Then he said he needed to go to the store to prepare for the resumption of work." "What was your conversation about?" Clara lowered her eyes. "Our marriage. We had differences, ideological ones. I'm a vegan activist and he—" "I know about your activities, Mrs. Morgan." Dawson nodded. "Did you argue?" "Yes. The last few months have been difficult. Baxter decided to invest in a new restaurant specializing in meat dishes. He invested our joint savings without my consent." Dawson noted this. Financial motives are often behind family murders. "Where were you last night between midnight and 3 o'clock?" "At home, alone. I took a sleeping pill and went to bed around 11. An alibi that cannot be verified. Classic." "Do you know anyone who might have wanted your husband dead?" Clara smiled bitterly through her tears. "There have been more of those people lately. After the scandal at the vegan fair, Baxter was hated by many activists. And after Emily Chen started investigating the criminal past of the family business, I think other enemies appeared." "Emily Chen, the reporter from the Seattle Chronicle?" "Yes. She was working on an article about the conflict between vegans and the meat industry, and she had information about the Morgan family's past." Dawson made another note. He needed to talk to this reporter. While the detective was questioning Clara, Emily Chen had already received news of Baxter Morgan's death at the Seattle Chronicle office. The news spread throughout the city with the morning editions, and Emily immediately realized that her investigation was taking on a new dimension. Now it wasn't just an article about the conflict between vegans and the meat industry. It had become a story about murder. Emily organized the information she had. Anonymous documents about the Morgan family's past, an interview with Clara about her path to vegan activism, a conversation with Baxter about his efforts to clean up the family business's reputation. She had last seen Baxter 2 days ago, and he had seemed depressed but determined. "I need to fix this," he had said, "for the future of the business." Now Emily wondered what exactly he meant. She decided to start her own investigation alongside the police. She had contacts in the vegan community, including several radical activists who might know something about what had happened. First on her list was the red-haired young man who had caused a scene at the vegan fair. Emily knew his name was Jeremy Wright, and he was associated with the more extreme wing of the animal rights movement. Meanwhile, at the Seattle Police Department's Homicide Division, Detective Dawson began compiling a list of suspects. At the top of the list was Clara Morgan, the victim's wife, who had a clear ideological conflict and financial motive. However, the writing on the wall seemed too theatrical for a spousal murder. Usually, spouses who decide to get rid of their partner try to stage an accident or suicide, rather than attract attention with ideological messages. Next on the list were radical vegan activists, especially those involved in the scandal at the fair. Jeremy Wright and several of his associates were known to the police for past incidents. It was also worth checking Baxter's business connections. Jason Foster, his partner in the planned restaurant, creditors, competitors, former employees, dissatisfied suppliers. Dawson methodically wrote down the names, classifying them according to motive and opportunity to commit murder. Towards evening, the first results came in from the lab. A preliminary toxicology test revealed traces of an unusual plant poison in the victim's blood, taxine derived from yew. This poison causes cardiac arrest and is often disguised as a heart attack. An interesting detail: despite the extensive knife wound, blood loss was relatively minor. The medical examiner suggested that the knife wound was inflicted after the victim's death. Baxter Morgan had been poisoned, and the stab wound and the writing on the wall were staged to mislead the investigation. This new information prompted Dawson to review his list of suspects. Radical activists could have staged a demonstrative murder, but the use of poison required planning and knowledge. This was not a spontaneous act of violence, but a carefully planned crime. Clara Morgan, a former biology teacher, could well have had the necessary knowledge of poisonous plants. And she had a motive, both ideological and financial. But even if she was involved, it would be difficult to prove. Yew poison is quickly eliminated from the body, and there might not be any traces left on the packaging, dishes, or containers used to prepare the poison. By evening, Dawson met with Clara again, this time at her home. She looked exhausted but carried herself with dignity. "I have some new questions, Mrs. Morgan," the detective began. "Have you ever studied toxicology or poisonous plants?" Clara tensed slightly, but her voice remained even. "I taught general biology at the university, including some aspects of botany. But I'm not an expert on poisons, if that's what you're asking. Are you familiar with the properties of the common yew tree? Like any biologist, yew contains toxins, that's well known. All parts of the plant except the berry pulp are poisonous." Dawson nodded. "Do you have access to this plant?" "Detective, yew trees grow in every park in Seattle. Our neighbor 3 houses down has a yew hedge. It's not some exotic plant." Dawson noted her knowledge and calmness. She showed no surprise at the mention of yew, which could mean she already knew the cause of her husband's death. Or she was simply well prepared for possible questions. "When was the last time you saw Jeremy Wright?" "Jeremy? At the vegan fair, like everyone else. He's not part of our organization's leadership, more of a peripheral participant." "But you know him?" "Seattle isn't that big of a city, Detective. The vegan community even more so. Of course I know him, as I know many other activists." Clara remained confident, showing no signs of anxiety or guilt. If she was involved in her husband's death, she was masterfully hiding it. "One last question, Mrs. Morgan. Did you love your husband?" Clara stared out the window for a long time, then replied quietly, "Once, yes, very much. Then we grew apart. But I never wanted him dead." Dawson nodded and got up to leave. At the door, he turned around. "We've determined that your husband was poisoned. The stab wound was inflicted after death." He watched Clara's reaction closely. Her face showed surprise, then shock, then thoughtfulness. But the detective couldn't yet determine whether this was a genuine reaction or good acting. 2 weeks after Baxter Morgan's murder, the investigation had reached a dead end. Detective Dawson had conducted dozens of interviews and examined hundreds of documents, but there was no direct evidence against Clara or any other suspects. The presence of U-poison in the victim's body indicated premeditated poisoning, but the source of the poison and the method of administration remained unknown. In his office, Dawson laid out photos of the crime scene, forensic reports, and witness statements. Something was eluding him. A key piece of the puzzle. "Detective Emily Chen from the Seattle Chronicle is on the line," his assistant announced. "She says she has important information about the Morgan case." Emily was waiting in a cafe across the street from the police station. She looked excited and a little nervous. "I have something that might interest you," she said, handing Dawson a folder. "I found someone who saw Clara Morgan the night before she was killed. She was buying organic tea at a specialty store in Fremont. But that's not the most interesting part." Inside the folder were photos of Clara with a man Dawson didn't recognize. "This is Daniel Greer," Emily explained. "He was Clara's professor at university and then her research advisor. According to my sources, they had an affair before she married Baxter, and they resumed their relationship in recent months." Dawson studied the photos carefully. Clara and Daniel were clearly more than colleagues. Their poses, glances, and touches spoke of intimacy. "That changes things," the detective said thoughtfully. "There's something else," Emily continued. "Daniel Greer is a specialist in ethnobotany and toxicology. His scientific work focuses on the traditional use of poisonous plants by indigenous peoples." Dawson felt the pieces of the puzzle starting to fall into place. "Did you talk to him?" "I tried. He canceled all his lectures and took a leave of absence right after Baxter's death. His neighbors say he left for a scientific conference in Europe." "Or he ran away," Dawson remarked. After obtaining a search warrant for Daniel Greer's home and office, detectives discovered diaries and email correspondence revealing his relationship with Clara. In one message sent a week before the murder, Clara wrote, "Baxter has made up his mind. He's investing in the meat business. I can't allow that, neither morally nor financially. We have to act now." An analysis of Clara's financial records revealed another curious detail. 3 months ago, she had taken out a life insurance policy on Baxter with a payout of $2 million. She had named herself as the sole beneficiary. In the apartment above the butcher shop where Baxter had been living for the past few weeks, detectives found an unfinished letter addressed to a lawyer. In it, Baxter expressed his intention to divorce Clara and review all financial agreements, including insurance and wills. Meanwhile, laboratory tests showed that U-poison had been administered to Baxter through food. Traces of organic tea with unusual additives were found in his stomach. Clara had brought this tea to her husband as a gesture of reconciliation before their last conversation. Dawson obtained an arrest warrant for Clara Morgan on suspicion of first-degree murder. When officers arrived at her home, they discovered that Clara had also disappeared. A search operation for the fugitive began. Airports, bus stations, and border crossings were alerted. Clara's credit cards and phone were tracked. 3 days later, she was found in a small motel on the Canadian border. She did not resist arrest. In the interrogation room, Clara remained calm. She denied her guilt and insisted that she had left to cope with her grief away from the press. "We know about your relationship with Daniel Greer," Dawson said, laying photos on the table. "We know about the insurance policy you took out on your husband, and we know that Baxter was planning to divorce you." For the first time, Clara looked confused. "You don't understand," she said quietly. "Then explain it to me, Mrs. Morgan." Clara was silent for a long time, then began to speak. The story she told was more complicated than Dawson had anticipated. Her ideological convictions were sincere, but behind them lay deep personal trauma. Clara's father, a farmer from Montana, had been ruined by competition from large meat processing corporations and had committed suicide. After this tragedy, Clara devoted herself to fighting the meat industry. Her marriage to Baxter began as a sincere relationship. She believed she could change his views, and he hoped her activism would subside over time. But their ideological differences only intensified, especially after Clara learned about the Baxter family's criminal past and the questionable practices of his suppliers. Her relationship with Daniel Greer began as professional botanical advice for her activism, but grew into a romance. It was Daniel who suggested the idea of poisoning. "He said it would be poetic justice," Clara admitted. "A butcher killed by a plant, and it would solve my financial problems." Baxter had invested all their savings in the restaurant without her consent. If he had filed for divorce, she would have been left with nothing, and her animal protection organization would have lost its funding. "I know I made a terrible mistake," Clara concluded, "but I truly believed I was doing it for a higher purpose." Clara Morgan's trial attracted national media attention. The defense tried to portray her actions as the result of ideological fanaticism, reinforced by the manipulations of Daniel Greer, who was never found. But the prosecutor convincingly proved the existence of a premeditated plan, financial motive, and an attempt to conceal the crime behind a mask of ideological messaging. The jury found Clara guilty of first-degree murder with aggravating circumstances. The judge sentenced her to 25 years in prison without the possibility of early release. The story of the vegan activist who poisoned her butcher husband caused a public outcry. For some, Clara became a symbol of fanaticism, where ideology becomes a justification for violence. For others, she was a tragic figure, a victim of manipulation and her own delusions. Emily Chen wrote a best-selling book about the case. In it, she explored in detail the psychological and social aspects of the conflict between Baxter and Clara, presenting their story as a microcosm of a broader social confrontation. The Morgan Sons butcher shop was sold at auction. Ray Peterson, a former assistant to Baxter, bought it with a loan and continued the business, retaining the historic name. Jason Foster opened a restaurant on his own, but removed the emphasis on meat dishes from the concept, making the menu more balanced, with equal attention to plant and animal products. And at the Washington State Women's Prison, Clara Morgan started a gardening program for inmates, growing vegetables for the prison cafeteria. In her first and only interview from prison, she said, "I believe that life is sacred, all life. My tragedy is that I forgot that in a moment of anger and despair.